Hello, everybody. A wonderfully warm welcome to the Wine with Jimmy channel here on the world of YouTube. Delighted to have you on board and thank you for stopping by. So this is a wine educational channel that really is designed to help those of you studying the world of wine study it more, better, and just to really get to grips with it so you can pass your exams with flying colors. So here we have the Wines of the World for the Diploma WSET. This is the series 5 of 9 in Bordeaux. This is on the left bank AOCs on Pauillac. There is a picture of Chateau Pichon-Baron or Longueville. Very famous romantic castle, this one. So yes, just to reiterate, the left bank AOCs here on series 5, and this is part 2 of 6 on Pauillac. Now, parts 1 and 2, including this one, is free content on the world of YouTube, but parts 3 through to 6 are only available on my e-learning portal. So you have to go across to www.winewithjimmy.com to sign up to gain that exclusive content. It's also ad-free there, and there's lots of add-ons as well to help you with your studies. If you are social media inclined, you can get in touch by the social media found at the bottom of every slide. And if you have a comment, question, or concern, you can pop it in the comment section just below this video on YouTube. So, of course, we're in the Haut-Médoc, which is this dark purple area on the left bank, identified where my arrow is just now. And let's go a little bit closer here, of course, with the Haut-Médoc appellations, with those famous names like Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, etc. So we're going to look at Pauillac, of course, as the one we are focusing on. Now, a stream called the Ruisseau de Juliac marks the part of the boundary between Saint-Julien and Pauillac, just to the south. So Saint-Julien just to the south of Pauillac. And to the north, across the Jalles de Bréul, lies Saint-Estèphe. Remember, on the previous video, we talked about Cos d'Estournel, Chateau Cos d'Estournel, which is really in the southern section of Saint-Estèphe, and Pauillac is very close to the border of that chateau. The town of Pauillac, which sits on the Gironde, is the largest in the Médoc, has a population of about 5,000 people. So not large in the grand scheme of things, but for these little romantic parts of Bordeaux, this is fairly large. Okay, so here you go. The appellation has a high proportion of Cabernet Sauvignon on the right-hand side. So this is much more than Saint-Estèphe to the north, which is about 50%. And this is on often those gravel banks that we find close to the estuary, enabling the variety, of course, to ripen fully in this location. Many of the top estates that we find here in very powerful and perfect Pauillac have a higher proportion of Cabernet Sauvignon in the blend, typically 70 or even 80% Cabernet Sauvignon. That results in wines of huge concentration and great ageability. Now, stylistically, as I mentioned, this really is considered the most structured of the left bank, with high tannins, high acidity, with excellent capability for aging out of the left bankers. So the geology here, of course, is gravelly. Now, Pauillac is somewhat more elevated than the surrounding area. Now, take that with a pinch of salt, because we're not talking about that it's 100 meters higher or anything like that. It's just 5, 10, 15 meters higher than surrounding areas. But it peaks at about 30 meters at the highest point at Chateau Pontencanet. So that's not that high. Please don't get it into your mind that elevation is the big thing here. It really isn't. The soil is gravelly, as with the most of the Haut-Médoc, and we have about 1,200 hectares of vines. 1,200 vines would be a problem and make these wines even more expensive than they already are. The famous estates we find here, I could do many, many, many slides here because, of course, there is quite a big volume of them in comparison to somewhere like Saint-Estèphe. But I'm just picking out 4 of the famous estates. And, of course, we're going to list the first growths, of which there are 3 here in Pauillac out of the 5 first growths. Now, the owner of this estate, that's now today called Laffitte Rothschild, the owner of this estate was originally called Gombach de Laffitte, where the name, of course, comes from. So the etymology stems from a Middle Ages owner. Alexandre de Ségur married Marie-Thérèse de Clausel, who was the heiress of Château-Latour, and therefore he marries in the estate. Remember, I mentioned this on the Saint Estèphe video, talking about my heart is in Calon. And Ségur comes from his namesake. He made his wines here in Laffitte because he owned this as well by marrying into this. Now, credit goes to the family, which is called the Goudal family, Goudal, who created the cellar here and saved many of the oldest bottles in the wonderfully dark cellars we find here, including their oldest bottle, which is a 1797 Laffitte. And even people like Thomas Jefferson, who was the 3rd president of the United States of America, was a huge admirer of the wines of Laffitte. Then entered the Rothschilds, which I won't go into too much detail because their story is long and very successful, but of course, really putting the estate on the map. Winemaking and vineyard management here at Chateau Laffitte Rothschild was managed by Charles Chevalier, who began the position in 1994. He was replaced by Eric Kohler in January 2016. And then eventually, Jean-Guillaume Prat replaced Christopher Salin as the named president of Domaine Baron Philip Rothschild. And we have the first female chairwoman of Domaines Baron de Rothschild, and that's Saskia in 2018. So that's Laffitte. Next up, we have Chateau Mouton Rothschild, of course, owned by the Rothschild family as well. Now, in 1718, Chateau Mouton and Chateau Calon-Ségur were acquired, remember, by Nicolas Alexandre Ségur, who already owned Laffitte and Latour. So really amalgamating his power in this northern part of the Haut-Médoc. With the death of Nicolas Alexandre de Ségur in 1755, his estate was separated between his 4 daughters. Now, we won't go into too much of the middle history, but I want to mention that the classification in 1855 was based on the market prices for the vineyard's wines, except from Chateau Mouton Rothschild. The wines of Mouton Rothschild were rivaling the price of Laffitte and Latour at that time. And Baron Philippe Rothschild referred to this as a monstrous injustice because it wasn't awarded first growth. It was believed that the exception was made because the vineyard had recently been purchased by an Englishman and was no longer in French ownership. But in 1973, it was elevated to first growth status after decades of intense lobbying and by its powerful and influential owner. And it was added. And there's not been many changes, of course, in the classification. Chateau Latour is next up. So the history of this chateau stretches back to the 14th century when the original tower was built as a fortress to guard the Gironde estuary during the 100 Years' War. The chateau story of wine really starts with the Ségur family acquiring various properties in the Médoc. Of course, Laffitte, Mouton, Calon, and he was Nicolas Alexandre, who I mentioned, was dubbed the Prince of Vines by King of France Louis XV. Latour really got into its golden era, its first golden era in the 18th century, and its wines became exceptionally well known. And since 1993, Francois Pinault, through his holding company called Artemis, is the new owner of Chateau Latour. Making, of course, exquisitely wonderful wines. And they're the 3 first growths. The second growth is the only one I'm going to mention here. There are many others. Is Chateau Pichon Longueville Baron, or sometimes just called Pichon Baron. This is second growth, and there is the wonderful castle just there. Now, The name of this estate comes after Baron Joseph de Pichon-Longueville, who took over the estate at the age of 19, and that was in the 18th century. He died at the age of 90, so 19 to 90 in terms of running the estate. And he divided his estate up in 1850 when he died between his 5 children. Trying to be fair to everyone, his 2 sons received 2/5 of the vineyard and the winemaking facilities, and his 3 daughters received the other 3/5 of the vineyards. The men that were awarded that estate, that became known as Pichon Baron, and the women got the Pichon Lalande, as it was known. Pichon Baron was eventually purchased by the AXA Insurance Group, and that started the modern era for Pichon, which really started to produce excellent wine from sort of the late 90s, early 2000s onwards. Jean-Michel Caz of Linge-Barge was brought in to run the estate as well. So some wonderful, beautiful chateau there. Now let's have a look at a video just to put this into play for you. Here we go. So we get an idea of the location. So here you are looking at a map of France. We're going to go down to Bordeaux with the 2 rivers running in it, of course, which is the Garonne and the Dordogne. And we're going to move up towards the left bank where we've identified in orange there that smaller commune. This is Pauillac. Of course, the town, remember, sits on the Gironde of about 5,000 people. And this is below Saint-Estèphe, but above Saint-Julien. So it benefits from the Gironde, has a lot of gravelly soils within it, which are fairly deep here in Pauillac. And of course, making very famous wines. Going to identify some of the famous estates, of course, not far from the border of Saint-Estèphe, where we find Coste d'Estournel, is Chateau Lafite. So it's separated by a small stream. Then we're going to go down towards the next, which is Mouton Rothschild. So these are both, of course, under Rothschild rule. And then we have our next estate going even further south, and that is our estate of Chateau Latour, which is towards the Saint-Julien border. I believe that is it. Yes, there we go. So thank you so much for following this video. I hope you found it useful. Saint-Julien is the next video, part 3, but will only be available, as all other parts 4, 5, and 6, to my subscribers of the portal at winewithjimmy.com. Please have a look at that. Go across. Any comments, concerns, questions, pop them in the video below this, so in the comments section, or get in touch via social media. And if you are in the United Kingdom, in London, come and see me at one of my establishments for a class, a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now.